Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, where we delve deep into the lives of our successful guests to learn the secrets of thriving to flourish abundantly in all areas of life. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. My guest today is the straight talking authority on leveraging your business and your personal brands to raise above the noise and elevate your position. An accomplished entrepreneur, CEO, and dynamic speaker, he captivates audiences with his high-voltage presentations and real-world practical steps for audiences to implement immediately. His trifecta motto, motivation, inspiration, and perspiration, leads his audiences in the process of leveraging both their business and personal brands to stand out as top industry leaders. I am so pleased to have with me today Dave Daley. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you, Alan. That was a awesome introduction. I got to meet that guy. He sounds like a great guy.
I have to tell you, Dave, I am pleased to have you here and honored to have a renowned inspirational speaker like yourself. At the same time, I really have to admit that I am really quite intimidated with both your success and with your very outgoing presence here. But I am pleased to have you.
Well, you know, let me share this with you, but we can't let it get out because it's going to ruin my image. I'm actually a big teddy bear, but don't let that get out. It's going to ruin my image.
Ruin your reputation. Okie doke. Dave, let's start with here. I want to ask you this question. If you are different today than you say you were 10, 20 years ago, how are you different, both psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually? And you could define spirituality however you want to define that.
Yeah, I mean, completely different 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and quite honestly, Alan, and I'm proud to say this, even 6 months ago, right? I just believe that we're here to grow, expand, and move forward as human beings, as source energy, right? As infinite intelligence. I believe that is our purpose. And I also believe so strong in that I believe that has a lot to do with why people aren't happy. They're not willing to learn more about themselves. They're not willing to overturn stones. They're not willing to, or they don't understand that is why we're here. And when we stop growing, we go back into safety. It just goes against nature.
Yeah. Well, let's step back to your childhood, and I want you to think back to a childhood experience that, as you look back on it now, you consider it to be a formative experience. Of course, at the time, you probably didn't look at it at that respect, but as you look back on your life, what was a formative experience from your childhood?
I would say, looking back, I grew up in a push-pull environment. So what I mean by that is I kind of give you that 30,000-foot view. I was put up for adoption at birth. I was in an orphanage for the first 18 months of my life in North Philly. I'm from the East Coast. And left back in the second grade, diagnosed with ADD, said I had a learning disorder, and never graduated high school. So when I say I was brought up in a push-pull environment, here's what I mean. I was told by the experts that I'm not supposed to win because I couldn't learn in that cookie cutter mode. But my mom was absolutely 100% my biggest fan till the day that she transitioned over, and never bought in to the experts saying that there must be something wrong with him. He must be broke. She would tell, and I'm going to answer your question now once I gave that context. She used to say to me, now my mom and dad, when they adopted me, were in their middle 40s, so they were 2 generations ahead. So I actually grew up and was raised in the World War II generation. And that generation was simply this. My dad said, lace up your boots, get to work. Nobody wants to hear it. But my mom would tell me growing up that I was a gift from God.
Mm.
And that absolutely molded my self-image.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is phenomenal. I've said this before on this show before, but there was a study conducted at Harvard. They published, as far as I know, the last publication of this was, they entitled it 75 Years in the Making. And what they did is they followed, I think it was 350 or so Harvard men from whenever they started this, whether it was the late 20s or early 30s, I can't remember. But they followed their lives in detail. I mean, they took in-depth psychological interviews, studied their cultural and social backgrounds, and they measured their height, their weight, their interests. They went so far as to measure the length of their scrotums. I don't know what that has to do with success, but for whatever reason, they did that. And so they followed them with in-depth interviews throughout the course of their life. And so 75 years in the making, they had been following these men for 75 years. One of the findings they found was that the most successful men, and this was not just financially, but successful in marriage and successful in their social cultural lives as well as financially, the most successful men had the warmest and closest relationships with their mothers. So you can count your mother as being a part of your success here. Dads didn't play a particularly role in success. What dads played a role in is the men who were able to enjoy life and just get out and play, and they had close relationships with their dads. But it was the moms who molded future success. So yeah, thank your mom.
Oh, 1000%. And what makes it even more impactful for me and really drives home the universe and energy and like energy attracts like energy. We didn't share blood, right? But the universe aligned us in the very beginning, or maybe even before that, depending on what you believe in, that like energy.
Wow, I like that. Yeah, neat. Well, tell us about a fork in your road that you came to. That was a deciding factor in your life.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but I'll share this with you. It's in my book. So my very first business that I built and sold from 1995 to 2000 was a public adjusting firm in right outside of Philadelphia, right outside of Northeast Philly. And I was about 3.5 years in, four years in, maybe close to 4 years in. And I had this something in me where I wanted to move on, right? I wanted to do something else, but I had that old conditioning, right? That I remembered when I was younger, where again, the experts told me I wasn't supposed to win. So that fear barrier started to come back in with that self-talk and that conditioning saying, well, if I sell this business, suppose I can't do this again, right? Suppose I got lucky. Suppose I lose everything. And that old conditioning kept coming back where I knew on one part of me, I had that something in me, in my soul, in my gut, that I wanted to do something else. But then at the same time, I had that other thing on my shoulder saying, you might have got lucky. You might not be able to do this again. So what happened was I was married at the time, and my wife said, why don't we take a long weekend up at my parents' house up in Vermont, and let's just chill. because I'm beating myself up over this, trying to figure this out. So long story short, we took a long weekend. We got up there on a Friday afternoon and early afternoon, and by late afternoon, I am in intensive care. I had a motorcycle accident. When we got up there, I jumped on my brother-in-law's motorcycle, lost control, hit a boulder, broke everything on his side, punctured a lung, and they had me in intensive care that night. And it's a little town, Manchester, Vermont, that if I had internal bleeding, they would have had to helicopter me over to Manhattan, because they didn't have they didn't have everything at the hospital if I had internal bleeding. I didn't have internal bleeding, but they kept me in intensive care for 4 days, I believe, right? And I share that because that was a huge transition. When I got out, when I got home, it took me about 4 or 5 months to even to go through this rehab, but I realized that life taught me a lesson. Everything can change within a second. And once I embraced that, within a year, I sold the business and started my second business that I built and sold. I started the second business that I built and sold in 2000, and then 2007, I sold that business. So, and from that point on, I've over the years have been fortunate enough to have built and sold 3 companies in 3 different industries, and but also crashed one to the ground. But I broke through that fear barrier and never had that stop me again, because life taught me a lesson and said, you know what, you need to wake up, because everything can change within a millisecond. And here's what's interesting: when I came out of intensive care, the doctor happened to be a younger guy that was worked out and was an athlete. So me and him really connected. And he said that it's interesting, if I would have hit a different way, I would have either been paralyzed or dead.
Wow.
Yeah. So a huge gift, huge gift. Yeah.
Well, can you go into a little bit more detail as to discovering this gift that life can change in an instant? Could you give us some specific examples how you took that lesson and specifically applied it to the ability to sell this business in a year and get on with something else that was more interesting to you?
Yeah, it was that aha moment as I was sitting there going through this rehab, saying and still having a business to run, right? Mm-hmm. Still, after the accident, it was about a year, about a year by the time I sold that, moved on, and that was it. That was, I couldn't working out for me, being physical is a big zen for me, right? I've always been an athlete, and I love working out, and I love I love that whole part of who I am, and that was taken away from me for a while too, for a few months. And that whole package that life gave me, that whole gift that life gave me, was this can be taken away so quickly. It was very humbling, but at the same time, it was so empowering, right? Mm-hmm. Now I had this second opportunity. I had this second chance, right? And now I'm just going to run with it. Now I am going to lace up my boots, get to work, and keep moving forward. And it was I say this, Alan, look, at the end of the day, life makes the rules. I don't make the rules. You don't make the rules. And the clearer the rules are in your mind, the easier this game of life is. And here's what I mean by that. When we have things that come up, you can perceive them and take action with them one or two ways. They're either going to be your heaviest anchor or your strongest propeller, but you get to decide. And and it was just game on from there on. And again, that fear barrier never creeped in enough to ever stifle me and stop me from moving on.
So what was the business that you
The first
sold?
business was a public adjusting firm. So now for people that aren't familiar, public adjusters are licensed and bonded in states to represent homeowners against their insurance company on a contingent fee for property claims. And people say, well, man, how did you get involved in that? And prior to that, I was a straight commission outside sales rep for 2 different companies for a few years, and then went on my own. So it just that's what it was. And then from there, when I sold that business in the beginning of 2000, literally I had started a fire restoration business, built that, sold that, and then moved out to San Diego. Had bought a struggling sports nutrition store out here, built that, sold that from 2008 to 2012, and then started a fire restoration business out here in 2013. Still have it, and also in 2015 started my Dave Daley Monster Motivator brand, keynote speaking around the country and personal development, and so.
So what was it about the business that you decided that this isn't for me, I want something else? And you went from that to fire restoration.
Yeah, Alan, it's the best way I can describe it is it's the entrepreneurial DNA. It's that creative, it's that drive, it's that something new, right? It's that keeping my attention, right? And then honestly, over the years, looking back, that was what the traditional school systems thought was broke, right? It's that entrepreneurial spirit, right? If you can't give me a purpose for this, then you lose my attention. Yeah. And,
I sure.
The other thing that might be fun and relevant to this whole theme, right, is people ask, when they see my appearance and they don't get a chance to know me in the beginning. And look, at the end of the day, we're human beings, so we do judge, right, from appearances.
Absolutely.
It's just a fact. But people say, how in the world did you get involved in personal development? How in the world are you consider yourself spiritual? How did you even get involved in this world? And it was through marriage counseling. Yeah. Our marriage counselor was, when I tell you spiritual, I think this will sum it up. 2006, she introduced me to Abraham.
To Abraham.
So, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Abraham Hicks.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, as spiritual as it gets. So anyway, for people that do know it, very, very spiritual, and it's still a part of my life. But what happened was I was going through marriage counseling, and I was the least spiritual person you'll ever meet at the time. But what happened, to make a long story short, as she was starting to share things with me about the universe, about energy, about the law of attraction, I was so intrigued that I would find myself from counseling meeting to counseling meeting, I'd have all these questions by the time we met again. And so, and I never, that hunger never left me. So every single day, I have a morning routine called the Monster Motivator Momentum Morning, and it's a 2-hour process, and nothing trumps that in the mornings for me.
As I sit here and listen to you, there just seems to be so many contradictions within who you are and how you present yourself. I find it extraordinarily fascinating. First of all, I can't ever see you in that in that insurance industry business. That just doesn't fit who I see you as. And also, I don't see you as being satisfied and fulfilled in the fire restoration business, and yet you've done that twice. So talk to me about what it is about that fire restoration business that appeals to you, because clearly there has to be some appeal to you.
Definitely, 100% what appeals to me is experiencing something new every day. I'm on the road. I love being on the road, and I love meeting new people and new situations. That being stuck in an office would be an absolute nightmare for me, right? It just wouldn't work. So 1000% is two things: is helping people get from the tragedy to whole, but really what feeds me, my soul, is knowing that I'm going to go out and I'm going to be in this place today. I'm going to be in this place today. I'm going to be in this place today. I'm going to meet new people. I'm going to experience new experiences, new circumstances, and that feeds me. That feeds my soul. And then that's what I also love about keynote speaking. That's what I love about personal development. And we have some awesome, exciting plans for the Dave Daley Monster Motivator brand in the next over the next 12 months to 18 months. So it's that new experience every single day gets my juices flowing. And business for me is a lifestyle. So I work 7 days a week, right? But I love it. It's my oxygen. It's absolutely, I have quotes on my wall, and the one quote that I have right here is, being an entrepreneur is neither a part-time or full-time job. It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. Yeah.
And I also believe that, and there's no right or wrong, I also believe there's a difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I was talking a few days ago to a very accomplished business person who has been in business in various different businesses for the last 40 years and has taken advice and is also an advisor for the last 20 years. And he said, this aspect of balancing your business and your life, he said, it just doesn't happen. He said, it's an integration. And if you want to be successful in business, it has to be an integration in your life. He said, some days you'll work 18 hours, some days you'll work 4, some days you won't work at all, but it's an integration in your life. So yeah.
And you know what that maps back to? One of the most important aspects of success, personal or business, self-awareness.
Yeah.
Knowing who you are, right? And what I'm a big believer that when you can understand your non-negotiables, now everyone else around you can, and everything starts to clear up. The fog starts to move for everybody, not just you, but even the ones in your inner circle and outer circle, and it just clears everything up. But self-awareness is huge.
Yeah, it definitely is. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is Dave Daley, an accomplished entrepreneur, CEO, and dynamic speaker, and he captivates his audiences with his high voltage presentation and real world practical steps for his audiences. And today we are actually delving into Dave's real world life, and I am surprised at how Dave has turned down the volume for this particular interview. I am impressed and inspired by your life and your experiences here. As I was saying earlier, there's many contradictions in your life. The one that I don't see a contradiction in is this aspect of your being a motivational speaker and coach. That seems to me to fit you perfectly, like a glove. And yet it is something you didn't come into until, what you said, 2015 is when you launched your...
was when I launched.
When you
Personal
launched it?
development, though, was introduced in 2007.
Yeah.
2006.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What do you mean it was introduced?
Well, through the marriage counseling.
Through the marriage counseling. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. You
Yeah.
know, that is when my life turned around too, was the ending of my marriage. Up until then, my life, I was asleep. But the day that I thought was the worst day in my life was actually the best day in my life. And it was the day in my life I woke up. So yeah, it's been a whole different life since then.
That's the beauty of life. Exactly
Yeah.
what you said, right? Is it seemed like at the time the worst thing in the world, but looking back, it was the greatest, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it's the best. It's the best.
Yeah.
Life is just phenomenal. And it's just the truth. It's just the truth. We're so blessed to actually be here.
Yeah.
And I like to live my life in this way. I call it the dynamic duo.
Mhm.
When you're blessed and ready for more, you become bulletproof.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Brady, but he leads meditations. He's actually a fellow in Dublin, Ireland. But he that's one of the things he points out is what an unlikely miracle that any of us are here, and that each and every day is a blessed day to wake up to, just for the fact of actually just being here another day.
Yeah.
And yeah, you live that. Um, I usually don't go into the business aspect of things with my clients because it's focused on the life, but you have such an integration between your life and your business, and particularly your coaching. So give us just a brief rundown here on motivation, inspiration, and perspiration.
So I believe that life is made up of interesting trifectas. And um, I believe that motivation, inspiration, and perspiration lead you to whatever it is you want if it's done in those actual steps. Let me share with you what I mean. So motivation. Now, there's a lot of motivational speakers and coaches that are embarrassed when they get tied to the word motivation because they don't think it's deep enough, right? And they don't think that they feel like their content, their message is much, much deeper. But I have to say that I don't agree with that, with how we are built as human beings. And here's what I mean, Alan. You need something that's gonna get your attention, that's gonna wake you up in the morning, right? And that really is motivation, right? What is it that's gonna get your attention? Now, if you don't have something that comes from inside that inspires you, that motivation will die out. So when you can find something to get you up in the morning and then tie into that inside why, right? What is it? Now that's going to carry that and create momentum for that motivation, marry that inspiration, and nothing happens without perspiration, inspired action. And there's a big difference in my mind on hustle and grind and inspired action. Inspired action maps back to belief. Inspired action is what is considered lifestyle, right? Hustle and grind, that flame goes out. Inspired action, that flame never goes out. So if you think about this, motivation, inspiration, and perspiration. Motivation is that target, that goal. Inspiration is that why. And perspiration is that inspired action. Here's what's interesting though. If you do it in reverse, you're going to lose. So if you're taking all this action, hustle and grind without identifying that goal, that direction, without identifying that why, that inspiration, you're just going to chase your tail and eventually give up. So motivation, inspiration, and perspiration, I believe, is the trifecta in life.
Beautiful. Appreciate that, Dave. We're running out of time here and getting to the end of our interview. I have one last question I ask all my guests. Before I get to that, tell our viewers and listeners how to get in touch with you.
Oh, great. Yeah, real easy. So it's Dave Daley, DALEYMM, like Monster Motivator.com on all of our social media, our website. Yeah, so real easy to find, and we're on every major platform.
Okay, great. Well, my last question is, when you come to the end of life's journey, how do you want your epitaph to read?
My terms.
Your terms?
My terms. Live life on my terms. Yeah, and I believe that's, to me, that's the definition of success. Whatever that definition is for you, my terms.
Wonderful. It's been a delight having you, Dave, and I hope we can have some future conversations. You've been a delightful and enjoyable guest, and a surprising guest in many wonderful ways here. So thanks for being on the show, Dave.
Oh, thank you so much, Alan, and thank you for having me.